to the 2013 webinar series from Datacolor. We're currently co-sponsoring with DxO, and we have the pleasure of having Hector Martinez, who is a imaging and color expert from DxO, with us today. We're going to be talking about editing and correcting of still images, and specifically this is geometric and color and lens type of distortion editing and correction that we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at it in multiple applications. David Saffir will be taking us through Photoshop and processes that tend to be used there for this, and then I will be going through Lightroom and what Lightroom is capable of these days for lens and geometric correction, and then we will hand things over to Hector Martinez, who will show us DxO's tools for doing these same things. So we'll make some references to areas where DxO might have some advantages as we go through the other applications, and then we'll let Hector take over and show us the DxO stuff. So first, let me tell you that that we're pleased to have you here. We're pleased to be co-hosting with DxO, and we're hoping that you'll stay until the end, where we'll have some giveaways and some reduced price offers. That's typically what happens at the end of these webinars, so if you've attended one before, you're probably familiar with that. And we hope that you will set your control panel up such that you can see the questions and answers section, because as each of us is working, the others will be answering questions as they come up. So if you set yourself up and get prepared, then I will hand over the first section of the presentation to David Saffir and let him take it away from here. Thank you, David.
Thanks, David Tobie. This is David Saffir. I'm a photographer and fine art printmaker, an educator. I live in Southern California, near Los Angeles, although you wouldn't know it today. We are heading into some, for us, very low temperatures later in the week with readings probably in the mid-20s at night. So that's really going to be a shock to the system, I think. Today we're going to talk about, we're going to provide an introduction to still image editing and correction. And when we say introduction, it's not so much that the concepts aren't, let's say, fundamental to the task or that they're non-important, as much as there's a really wide range of things that we could address, and we're trying to focus on some of the most important ones, hoping they'll provide you with the most leverage possible in your work with your still images. And of course, my slides won't advance. There we go. So we're going to consider this as that in the past, camera and lens distortion corrections were difficult to overcome. You had to have expensive equipment like a 4x5 or an expensive shift tilt lens or an expensive wide-angle lens. And now a lot of that can be accomplished in post-production. And one thing that sits in evidence of this is that Hasselblad has changed its philosophy completely from trying to build perfect lenses to building lenses that are very, very good, but that also need their software to provide the best possible images. That the software is an essential component of image quality. And then we have another branch of this, which is that in applications like DxO and Photoshop and Lightroom, there's, in varying degrees, we have tools that allow us to make corrections in post-production to make up either for flaws in the lenses or shortcomings in the equipment that was used to take the shot, or even failures in technique. So some of the questions now become, when does one make these corrections, and how much of a correction does one make? Now, an example of basic principles. By the way, I didn't mention that we've got a lot of material to cover, and we've got 3 presenters, so I'm going to move fairly fast and assume that you have a basic understanding of some of these things. An example in terms of basic principles is the classic deal where you're shooting a building, and in order to encompass the building from top to bottom in the frame, you have to tilt the camera backwards. And of course what happens is, as you can see the diagram on the left, or the schematic, you can see that the light from the subject is coming into the camera, and of course because the back of the camera is tilted, it's going to distort the image on the sensor plane or the piece of film, and you get what's called keystoning. The building looks like it's going to fall over. And it's a classic problem. It's one that's relatively easy to fix with the right kind of lens or the right kind of camera. But nowadays we can also do this in post-production relatively easily. And in some cases, people that I know would say, well, you can't do as good a job. I would argue with that. It depends on the shot and the photographer. Then we'll get into that a little bit, and we'll see how that looks. Another way to look at it is lens flaws or lens geometry can distort the image, and of course we all know the classic issue of barreling and pin cushioning. A lot of this is, where I see a lot of this is in situations where someone is using a zoom lens in particular, and at the short end or the long end of the zoom lens you'll see more of this kind of distortion than you will say in the middle of the range. So less so with an L lens like the 24-105 from Canon, but maybe some of the less expensive lenses with long throw lengths. God help us, the 28-300 in some cases is really a villain at both ends, the 28 end and the 300 end. And you really need some help in correcting these kinds of geometry distortions. And here's some examples, again, going to basic principles. You can see the distortion that's created by, it's particularly easy to see in architecture, so we're going to pick on architecture to a fairly large degree today. You can see in these photographs that the camera position and the size of the subject have a lot to do with it. On the upper left, of course, the picture of the church, that's one of the images that David Tobie will be discussing later. Or on the lower left, the picture of the building, this is at Princeton University, has a number of issues, partly because of the angle of the building in relation to the camera, the level of the camera in relation to the building, and it's shot at ground level, looking up. So you actually have perspective distortion in several planes, which makes for some interesting difficulties. On the upper right, it was shot with a very wide-angle lens at close range, and so the barreling distortion is very pronounced. And on the right, we're shooting indoors, looking up with a wide-angle lens, and so things that are close to the camera look a little bit distorted, but things that are farther away are really quite whacked out and look like they're about to tip over. So here's an example. It's a common one, building tilt, and on the left, upper left, we have an example of an image that's not been reprocessed in any way other than the normal adjustments in Camera Raw. And then on the right, the image has been straightened largely to the degree that it can be. There's an interesting optical illusion going on here, which is that this building is actually built on a slight slope. You can see that there's steps on the right, and that this wall actually increases in height. The base of the wall is thicker on the right than on the left. So the wall, although the wall looks like it's a little bit out of control in terms of its, I guess you would call its perspective in relation to the rest of the building, it's actually been straightened out to, a fair degree, and so the building is pretty much as seen in the right-hand photograph. Now, I'm going to use some screenshots. Later on, we're going to go live with some of the software, but in the interest of saving time, I'm going to use some screenshots and assume that you know some of the basics in Photoshop. Typically, what I do when I'm working on an architectural photograph like this is I enable the rulers, which is Command or Control R, and so at the top of the screen you would see the ruler, and you can watch my cursor. You can actually grab the top of the screen and drag a ruler down, or grab one from the left and drag it over, and I use those as reference points. So here on the left, by the way, when I make a shot like this, I typically try to find at least one vertical line that I can be absolutely certain is going to stay vertical in the shot, and that becomes a reference point. And also, I guess you would call it an anchor for the rest of the image. And I put two of these guidelines in here, and once you see this guideline, you can see that this tower is definitely in trouble. Now, one of the ways to straighten out, so to speak, the building is to go in Photoshop, first of all, to go Select All, which is Command or Control A, and then go Edit Transform Perspective, and you will see these handles appear on the corners, first of all, and on each of the 4 corners on the image. And if you left-click and hold and drag the right or left-hand one out, they will both move in synchrony away from the image, and it's going to stretch the image outwards. And you can see how it's starting to become straighter here on the big tower, and the corner has moved slightly away from the anchor corner that we had specified before. Now, one of the problems with this too is when you do this, it tends to make everything in the picture get shorter because you're stretching the pixels in the left to right direction. Another way to do this, which is sometimes a little bit more productive and a little less destructive of the image, remember that since this corner here is a different distance, it's closer to the camera than this corner here, that they're going to show differing degrees of distortion. And so sometimes it's more useful to go Edit, Transform, Distort. And that means you can pull any corner that you want in any direction that you want. So in this case, I pulled the right-hand corner more to the right because the tower here was taller and needed more correction. And then I pulled the left-hand corner only slightly, simply because when I pulled the right-hand corner, it tended to pull this corner over. It's kind of like working with rubber bands. So I pull the right-hand corner over, and then I correct on the left-hand side to bring this into line. Now the building is still too short, but we're getting there. So the next thing I would do in Edit, Transform, Distort is I would grab this anchor here, and I would pull it up, and I would drag it upwards, of course without going out of the frame, and try to make it look a little bit more realistic and not so squat or squashed down. And that's usually something that one does from memory, in the sense that you can't really know how tall the building's going to be without a reference. And so you're doing what looks pleasing rather than what is absolutely accurate in many cases, but it does work pretty well. I've not ever had any comments from people that the building looks bizarre or distorted or, pulled out of shape. Now in this case we have a perspective distortion in at least 2 planes. Very briefly, we've got the keystoning of the tower, but also because of the angle of the shot, and of course that the building is taller than the camera height and is not moving, but the structure is leading away, from the camera, that you've got another issue right here with this side of it. And I'll very briefly go through some of this. Basically what I did was I used the Edit, Transform, Distort, and I pulled the tower back into shape. And then I also pulled this cornice or rooftop over a little bit. But because it's tilted back so far and it's got so many issues, that sometimes it's useful to go right down to the bottom here and grab the bottom corner and push it in. Now that means you're going to lose a little part of your photograph. And so you have to be careful that you're not going to clip the corner of the building or anything like that. But once you push this in, this starts to pull in, and it changes the viewer's perception of the image and the perception of the amount of distortion on the side of the building. And so it's not going to be perfect. Sometimes you can't really make a perfect image, and David will talk a little bit about acceptability versus perfection, and sometimes that even perfection can be a form of distortion in its own right. But in any event, there's artistic judgment involved here. That's what I'm getting at, and that artistic judgment can help drive your decision making. And it's sometimes more important that the image is pleasing than it's absolutely accurate. So here's the final version. I think it looks pretty good. It's a little bit too contrasting on my screen. It's probably just a side effect of go to webinar, I'm going to flip back through the slides and show you the original. So there's the original, and there's the final. And it's nice. It's nice. It's not perfect, but it's nice. And, you know, if I had to criticize this, I would say perhaps I should have moved the camera position a little bit when I was creating the image. Another basic principle is if you're shooting with a wide angle or a fisheye lens, this is pretty much what things look like. This is an industrial shot that I was doing for a customer. Post-production, all these wires went away, and so we were really trying to show how this particular lighting system was irradiating this grid. This is actually an air handling system that's used to sterilize air in hospitals to prevent things like Legionnaire's disease. In any event, if you take this shot raw, you're going to get a fair amount of distortion. You may or may not want to keep that. One way to get rid of the distortion in Photoshop and in Camera Raw is to go to this panel here and specify the make of the camera. The lenses that Nikon makes will be listed, and each lens has what I call a characterization or profile, and it will automatically, through the software, create a correction. You can see that this is really quite straight now, quite flat. Look at all these nice straight lines. And so if this is the effect that you want to see, of course you pick the lens, et cetera, you pick the model and the profile. You can see that there's really a huge difference here between A and B. And so in this case, you could correct the effects of just a wide-angle lens or even a fisheye lens. In this case, it was a 10.5 fisheye. Very, very easily. Now there are other sliders here under the manual tab which allow you to push a slider back and forth from left to right for pin cushioning or barreling. They are less precise. It's a little more difficult to use, but in some cases you'll have to resort to doing that. So that's a quick introduction. I was supposed to limit my remarks to about 15 minutes so the other presenters can have a shot at it. And so I'm going to, I believe that's my last slide. Yes, it is. So I'm going to change presenters here over to David Tobie.
Hello.
And I've got to figure out how to do this.
Well, you don't need to change presenters, David. You can keep doing the presentation, and I'll just talk over your slides.
Okay, go forward.
So go ahead and pop that over to the next slide.
You're
And we're now looking at Lightroom instead of Photoshop. And of course, David cheated a little bit in his last slide and got into ACR, Adobe Camera Raw, which is basically the same engine as Lightroom, except it's used kind of on the way into Photoshop. So many of the things David was showing you were actually in Photoshop, and which is powerful and flexible. But those last things he was showing you were in ACR, and they would be virtually identical to what you can do in Lightroom, except they're in different locations, because while the engine is the same, the shell is different. So the first question here is what images to do this kind of correction on. And if you look at this image, you have to understand the rule is when you do vertical correction to architecture, there's nothing left at the top that's wider than what you have at the bottom, which means if I want to keep this image all the way to the bottom and correct it at the top vertically, I'm going to lose, well, all of the sky. I'm going to lose all of the outside buildings. Basically, it's going to be one tower, and that won't make a very good image. Besides, you know, the sense of verticality and vertigo is part of what makes this image interesting. So I would leave this image exactly the way it was. I wouldn't even adjust it minimally because it's really a mood image rather than a you know, kind of a straight formal architectural image. Why don't you move on to the next one, David? We'll make another comparison. So here's another building that is distorted. It also has vertical distortion, as well as other types of distortion. The joke here is you can't even use a lens correction on this, because as well as the lens in the camera distorting this, you have a mirror that's distorting it. And the mirror is the back window of a Fiat car. Now, Fiat does not publish correction specs for lens correction of their windshields and rear view windows. So there's no way you could possibly correct the distortions in this. So you wouldn't shoot this shot unless you found those distortions pleasing in the first place. And if you did try to correct this, it would make a big mess. It'd distort the car. It would show up the details of distortion by getting rid of the major distortions. So this is kind of a take it or leave it shot. Either you like this the way it is or you don't shoot it, but you're certainly not going to correct it architecturally. The next one is a shot that, click.
Oh, the next shot is
That's
click.
you. Yes. Next shot is, this is much more of a classic architectural shot. We're back to Princeton where a couple of David's buildings were shot. And here I have a problem, shooting the facade of a building. And architects like to see their buildings shot not in perspective as this is done, but in elevation view, so that it looks exactly the way it did on the architectural drawings. And the way to do that is use an infinitely long lens from an infinitely far distance away, and will turn your image into something that looks very much like the elevation views. However, in reality, you run into things, the building on the other side of the street or trees or whatever. Here I'm running into another problem, which is that as I'm backing up, I'm stepping down a slope, and by the time I'm far enough back to get the entire building in my shot, I'm really down kind of at basement level. Now, what's going to happen to this tower, which already has what I'll call an oversized cornice on the top of it? If you'll move forward one slide, we'll show you what it looks like if I actually make this tower vertical. Now, I think we can all agree that that's a little bit disturbing. That if the cornice had been a little less overwhelming to begin with, we might get away with this type of a view, but we're certainly not going to do it for this building. So let's let's say that the right answer to this would have been a great big step ladder that I placed in this location and made myself about 8-10 feet higher in the image plane, and then I could have gotten this shot. Well, Princeton University frowns on you walking around with large ladders.
An 8-foot ladder.
Yeah, they probably wouldn't have liked me doing that, so I have to live with this. So if you look at the next slide, you can see that it's a compromise. And this compromise might, to memory, look very much like the original image. It's not. It's corrected about halfway. And the compromise here is it doesn't make the cornice too large, doesn't distort the geometry too much, but it reduces that kind of extreme compression that was happening from being downhill from the building. This is more like what I would have gotten had I been a few feet higher up. So this is a good compromise on a nice image, but it's not by any stretch of the imagination architecturally corrected.
No, but
so
I
let's
think
move on to
the word that you use in here is believable, and I think that's an important concept.
Yeah. I mean, when we're talking about what's aesthetically acceptable, part of this is believability. Now, if you look at this, this is not believable.
No.
As shot in the camera, this is not believable. There's visible distortion here. Even if you like having all those vertical little turrets pointing towards, a point in the middle of the sky rather than vertically, there's clearly some lens distortion, and that's the first thing we have to deal with. So if we move one slide forward, you'll see what happens when you simply, this is the same lens correction David showed you in ACR. This is in Lightroom now. Now, some of the best lens correction in the world is in the DxO software, and so Hector will get his shot at this, but the simple lens correction that Adobe does gives you this result. And what you see after you do the profile section is, I'm going to hit one more slide forward. This is the color section. And just on general principles, what I've done here is I've checked the remove chromatic aberration box so that if there is any kind of colored edging on the items at the corners of the image, that will remove it. Mm-hmm. And now if you'll move one more slide forward, watch the building as this happens. What's going on here is once I'd adjusted the lens, I could see that the image wasn't horizontal. For a free-hand shot taken shooting up overhead, it wasn't bad. I mean, I was only 0.3 degrees off from horizontal. But once you got rid of the barrel distortion, it showed, and I needed to make, I'm going to say this, I needed to get the triglyphs and the metapes at the bottom straight. Really, that's what those are. Trust me. So now we've straightened the image and we've eliminated the lens distortion. The big elephant in the room to begin with was the fact that you're looking up at this, and it has this crane your neck feel to it. Now, we're never going to be able to look straight forward at it because many of the elements are being seen from underneath. So let's do the maximum. Next slide, we'll show you the maximum vertical correction that Lightroom will offer. There you go. That looks better. However, what's happened here? We brought elements around the edges that I'd already cropped out of the image back in through this correction. So, and I'd have to run it through Lightroom twice to get any more correction than this. And by the way, the advantage of doing your corrections in Lightroom is you're doing it to your raw file, not to a TIFF or a JPEG. So you want to do what you can in Lightroom because it leaves your raw file intact. However, if you run it through any of these tools twice, you're in the exact same situation as if you took it into a plugin or into Photoshop because it's no longer your raw file. So one more move forward here and we'll see the crop on this image. So here we have it. This has been lens distortion corrected, it's been horizontally corrected, it's been vertically corrected, and it's been cropped back into an image. So if we move forward, we can see the results of this. That's the original before shot, and that's the after. Flick that a couple times, David. Before, after. Now, if the goal of this is, as we're saying, to make it believable, to make it look right, kind of in quotes, I believe that the result here, this still isn't an excellent image, but it no longer has that warped, distorted feeling that the original had. So I believe this is appropriate correction. Go through just a couple more slides before we move on out of Lightroom. Here's an interior of a church. The HDR fanatics will say, but wait, you should have had a tripod, which, by the way, they wouldn't have let me have in this church. And you should have taken multiple images, and you should have made it look like Spider-Man vision up at the top where you can see all the details in the dark, and then you could have brought back in what you've lost in the stained glass window in the front. And the answer is, I can probably live with all that. The dynamic range of this camera, it's a 5D Mark III this was shot with, is pretty phenomenal. However, I can't live with the perspective distortion in this image, and because I've put a wide-angle lens on here, I'm now getting a lot of vignetting, a lot of darkening in the corners that is beginning to bother me. So let's move through this from start to finish in one fell swoop. Go ahead. There's the end result.
There we go.
Now, it looks a little artificial. The tops of the columns are a little distorted, but for an interior like this, I much prefer this to having everything sloping off towards a point in the zenith up in the sky. So what have we lost? If you go back again, David, we can look at what was in the original image. Those windows on the side, you'd have to use a fisheye lens to get those, and they would have been so distorted when you're done that you really wouldn't have been satisfied with them anyways. And we've cropped just a hair off the bottom. We've lost the top of that point at the top in that correction. I can live with all that. It's still a good image. It still has the tops of the capitals on the columns. It still has the white crossbar on the floor. So that to me is an acceptable case of what I'm going to call extreme correction. If you move one forward, you can see the correction settings here. One more slide forward. What we've got here is a -4 distortion, which is telling us that the lens distortion that I used on this wasn't perfect. DxO might have been a better job up front, but what I'm doing is adding an extra distortion transform because there was still a little barrel left. A -61 vertical, that's bringing the verticals back up to vertical. Didn't go as far as I did in the previous image, but there's a lot more architecture in here. You can't mess around with a building with this kind of depth the way you can mess around with a flat facade like we had in the last image. There's a tiny rotation, less than 1 degree off level, which I would have probably gotten it closer on a tripod, but you still end up moving this fractionally even on a tripod. And then the last adjustment was the vignetting, where I've lightened the corners 41%. That shows you, even though this was a Canon L series lens, it still had significant vignetting, color darkening in the corners caused by being such a wide-angle image. So those are the settings, and I believe we'll have a before and after here following this, so you can look at it one more time. Go ahead forward.
Forward.
See the forward, original image, and then I believe the next one will be the corrected image. So it's your aesthetic choice which of those two you like better, but those are the techniques that were used to do this. Now this is all being done to the raw image, and I'm a believer that you should do in RAW what you can do in RAW. If you use DxO's converter, they have a different set of tools for adjustments in the RAW image, and then they have another perspective correction tool for after-the-fact corrections to your post-RAW image. Here what I'm doing is just what I can do in the RAW image. I'm either going to use a DxO plugin after that if I need more, or I'm going to open it into Photoshop for the kind of flexibility that David was getting in his adjustments. So that covers it for Lightroom, and now we get to see what Optics Pro and Viewpoint would do for images. And we hand things over to Hector Martinez. This time we're actually going to have to swap presenters since he's going to be working live.
Okay, I'm going to change you over to the presenter, Hector.
No worries. Okay, so I'm going to show my screen right now, and just let me know if everyone can see my screen. Okay, so first I'd briefly like to introduce myself. My name is Hector Martinez. I'm the Channel Sales and Educational Manager at DxO Labs. And people intend to know us to be in two different routes. They know us to be those mad scientists that study optics and sensors for a living. And on our consumer side, we create image processing software for all demanding and serious photographers. So as we already know as photographers that there's three common problems about what we're discussing today. That's skewed perspectives, that's volume deformation, volume anamorphosis, I just like to call it plain or simple warping, and tilted horizons. So when you have your skewed perspectives, that's when we're dealing with like convergent lines. Usually the cause of this is when the position of the photographer's off-key. And when it comes to volume deformation, usually when it comes to like bodies or faces or spherical objects seem to be slanted or stretched out towards the outskirts of the edges, the cause of that is the position of the subject in the field of view. Tilted horizons, I'm not really going to waste time on tilted horizons because I'm pretty sure David and CD can agree with me. If you've seen one tilted horizon, you've seen them all. So what makes Viewpoint so special is that we correct for all three of these issues. We offer certain exclusive automatic or manual features that you can only find using Viewpoint 2. So we automatically apply distortion corrections that are completely tailored to your hardware. Unlike anyone else in the world, we're actually physically taking the hardware into consideration by studying the physical optics and the sensors to provide you with a dedicated, not a generic optical module to give you the best image quality over pretty much anyone else in the industry, hands down, because we've studied these pieces of hardware so closely. And this helps us to correct for things such as barrel distortion, pin cushion, and fisheye. So that being said, I'm actually just going to launch Viewpoint, and we're just going to jump into Viewpoint. And this is actually our first demonstration that we're going to get into, which is our distortion fix when it comes to fisheye lenses. Considering the fact that we've already took into consideration the EXIF and the metadata from the lens and the sensor, we can either go into distortions and select an automatic correction, and there goes your before, here goes your after. Or we can even take it a bit further, because I mean, if anyone's just like me, not everyone's into the automatic fix. Some people like to fine-tune and manually fine-tune themselves. So we also offer you a manual fix where you can choose from barrel, pincushion, and fisheye distortion. So Viewpoint's actually the only software on the market for Mac or PC that's entirely dedicated for correcting elements or issues with anamorphosis, keystoning, or tilted horizons, completely based off of our exclusive geometric technology that we've been developing for like well over 20 years or some nonsense like that. Viewpoint actually lets us easily and effectively restore like the natural proportions to our subject matter, and there's actually several ways that you can use Viewpoint. Like David said, you can use it as a standalone application, you can use it as a plugin. It really doesn't matter. I mean, what's really nice and accommodating about the software is that the interface is composed of like 5 individual parts. You have like a really nice big real estate for your image display window. You have your upper toolbar that has like your visualization tools. You have your correction tools on your right hand side, and then your lower palette will show like your before and after. So we're going to talk about like anamorphosis, warping, deformation, call it what you want, but anamorphosis, also known as warping, as we already known, is actually taken into account for the shooting parameters while using a wide-angle lens, as David was explaining earlier. you can easily correct for the deformations of subjects located along the edges, whether distortion is like horizontal, vertical, or diagonal in Viewpoint. But what I would have to admit, and this is something that actually took me some time to figure out, and I'm pretty sure that the other two Davids can agree with me, how to determine what type of anamorphosis issue you're dealing with is always key. So that's what always is going to take you for the run. So what we're going to do right now is we're actually just going to bring in another image, because I'd actually like to give you a visual demonstration of what we're talking about. So if you focus on this one image, if you could be so kind just to keep your main focus attention along this lovely lady's head, we can clearly see that the spherical objects near the edges seem to appear stretched or flattened. So it's clear to say that your image is suffering from what we would consider to be, I guess, cylinder volume anamorphosis. In this case, we would easily just go into Viewpoint's volume deformation and select our cylinder tool. And just by selecting our cylinder tool, you can clearly see that the lovely lady is being brought back to the proper proportion just in the forms of one click of a button. See, the beauty about our software is that we're giving you a laboratory standard with the availability to fine-tune at your own discretion, where you can still have some advanced settings where you can work off of your horizontal axis or your vertical axis. Now, when it comes to like the horizontal slider is just pretty much going to increase the proportions of the image along the horizontal axis. And like I said, the vertical slider is just going to compress the image vertically. So let's bring in another image, because I only got 15 minutes. And I apologize if I'm speaking too fast, but I live in New York, so we talk fast. So let's get into our next image. So for this image, keep your main focus attention along the lovely lady's head and her arm. You can clearly see that her arm is huge. I mean, this woman looks like she can take me on in a good bar fight. But we can clearly see that the spherical objects seem to be stretched towards the corners of the image. So it's clear to say that we're suffering from something known as physical anamorphosis, or what we know to be like the bubble effect. In this case, we would use our diagonal correction tool, which is located right next to your cylinder tool. So I'm going to select my diagonal tool, and you can clearly see now that her head has properly been brought back into proportion, as well as her arm. I'm going to just do a quick little before and after. So this is what we shot. This is what we fixed. What we shot. And what we fixed. One more time, what we shot and what we fixed. Now, for something that is probably going to make CD really excited, because I personally know C. David Tobie, and I know he's really big about like his architectural photography. So just talking about Viewpoint, Viewpoint has a really wide workspace with a really wide viewing area, and with really simplified and intuitive tools and a control palette that's really pretty much just really direct and forward in your face. There's not like a whole bunch of tremendous amount of palettes attacking me all at once. This software was purposely designed for geometric and perspective control issues. When we purposely designed this photographer, we thought about 5 individual photographers. That's your wedding, your architect, your interior, your aerial, and your event photographer, because they share those 3 common flaws, whether they be skewed perspective, geometric corrections, or tilted horizons. So now we're going to actually go into like more of the keystoning fix corrections that we have, and it's located under your perspective. So for that, we're just going to actually just bring in our next image. Let's get rid of this. Okay, and as David was explaining earlier, I'm pretty sure we can all guarantee that we have one image in our catalog that looks like this. The building is falling backwards. There's a major issue. So for us, what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the keystoning tools easily to help us as end users to straighten out lines and weird perspectives, giving us a more natural perspective to look at. So in a situation like this, what I would do is I would use something called my Force Vertical and Parallel Line tool, which is located in your perspective right here. You can clearly see that the minute I've selected that tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down to the bottom of the color line, and I'm going to make it like a really distinctive red so we can clearly see it, you can clearly see that 4 individual anchor points have appeared. What I'm going to do is, and this is kind of like in reference to what David was doing with his ruler, I'm just going to use these for the best vertical reference points, and I'm going to drop them right where they're at. But the beauty about this is that I have 30% more fine-tuning control over any other application on the market. Not only that, Viewpoint allows me to stretch this rubber band, as David was saying, literally in any direction, and this rubber band will not pop in my face. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to go to the Apply Corrections, and there goes your building sitting right side up. So we went from here to here. This is what we captured. This is what we fixed, this is what we captured, and this is what we fixed. Now it's time to crop. By default, Viewpoint's going to crop automatically for you, but the beauty about our cropping feature, unlike any other software in the market, is that we're actually giving you the full capability of utilizing your whole entire canvas size to your own discretion. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to drop down on that negative space on the blue, because I'm pretty sure both Davids would agree with me. They'd be like, Hector, there's just way too much sky in there. You need to just cut that out a little bit. So I'm going to apply the correction, and there goes your pretty building sitting right side up. Here goes what we captured. Here goes what we fixed. Here goes what we captured, what we fixed, what we captured, and what we fixed. So now for the next tool is we're actually just going to force our parallel lines. And these are all nifty tools that I'm pretty sure 100% that CD can use to apply to his own corrections when he's out in the field shooting like his different types of buildings and stuff like that. So in a situation like this, what we're going to do right now is we're actually going to force our parallel lines, which is right next to the perspective tool, and we're going to force the parallel lines. It's the same theory, just a different practice. Besides referencing off of my vertical, I'm just referencing off of my horizontal, and I'm pretty much done. We're going to apply the correction. And there goes the slanted building. It's coming a little bit more. Before and after.
Hector, can you hear me?
Yep.
One of the things I like about this is that you've got distortion in at least 2 planes, and the software still fixes it just fine.
Oh, absolutely, David. I mean, considering the fact, and this is what you and David were discussing initially beforehand, this is what makes DxO so unique. I mean, I like to consider us like those mad scientists. Like, considering the fact that if we didn't put the physical hardware into consideration, we wouldn't be capable of getting these type of corrections. And the message that I'm trying to get across to all our end users is, you know, don't get me wrong, you know, generic modules were getting us, you know, so far, but for something as tedious and as extensive as this, considering the fact that we're creating these dedicated modules, it just gives you that extra advantage over anyone else, and that 30% more flexibility is just like, I mean, it's just a godsend from like the image processing gods for us to just use at our own discretion. So right now what we're going to do is we're actually going to get into one of my favorite tools, and this was before we introduced our new tool, but this tool that you're about to see is our exclusive patented tool. It's called our 4-point rectangular tool, and what the rectangular tool is capable of doing is it's actually going to correct both vertical and horizontal keystoning issues on each side independently. So this is actually a really nifty tool to use when you're trying to restore different shapes or different forms of distortions in a scene, or just pretty much just trying to straighten out like an interior space, for an example, that's not shot in perfect alignment per se. Hey, see David, Tobie, you're okay. You don't need that big 8-foot ladder anymore, so you won't get in trouble. That was taken either at a low or high advantage point. So what I'm going to do right now is we're actually just going to go into the perspective, and we're going to select our exclusive 4-point rectangular tool. I'm going to actually go down to the color line, and I'm going to switch it over to a green so it's a little bit more distinctive. So what I'm doing right now is we're just referencing off of the 4 corners, horizontally and vertically, And literally, if everyone at home had seat belts attached to their seats, I would literally tell you to buckle up, because this correction is going to take you for a ride. So what we're going to do right now is, I'm done. That's it. I put my 4 anchor points independently where they need to be at. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to apply the correction and put that picture frame right in front of your face. What I'm going to do right now is we're going to crop out. And considering the fact that Viewpoint's giving us the capability of utilizing the whole entire canvas size, and let's be realistic, considering the fact that these megapixel counts are going through the roof nowadays, it just gives me the availability, as David would say, just to stretch that rubber band so much more. And here goes your corrective preview. So this is what I shot. This is what we fixed. What I shot. What DxO Viewpoint 2 fixed, what I shot, and what we fixed. So I would have to say, to see a correction of this extent, I would have to say I was extremely impressed. So now we actually have a new tool and toy for CD to play with. So next time you go out, David, and you're shooting those architectural environments, we actually have a new and improved special tool just for you, and it's actually called our 8-point mode. Our 8-point mode gives you the availability of adjusting both horizontal and vertical reference points independently on their own access points. So what we're going to do right now is, because if you keep your main focus attention here, you can clearly see that it's on a different perspective. So we want to make that perspective seem as if we're standing right there in person. So I'm taking each individual anchor point and I'm just trying to reference off of my best reference points, as David and I would say. So there goes that. I'm going to see if I could get away with this one and put it all the way over here. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to apply the correction, go into natural mode, and once again, for me, this is just way too much sky, so we're just going to get rid of the sky, and this is just a little way too much brick on the ground for me, so we're just going to open that up. Apply the correction, and there goes your pretty scene, sitting nice and straight. So once you're using like the perspective tools, you're going to notice that there's some really advanced settings right here. You got your up and down, your left and right, your horizontal vertical ratio, and your intensity slider. Your intensity slider alone is going to give you 30% more fine-tuning control over any other application on the market. Your up and down toggles the image around a horizontal axis, while moving your left and right toggles, it just pretty much moves the image around a vertical axis. And your H and V ratio, the slider just lets you fix distortion that comes sometimes, may it be with like accompanying keystoning corrections or anything like that. And then your intensity slider, like I said, just gives you 30% more fine-tuning control over any other application on the market, which is really nice. The cropping tool is going to happen by default, but whether if you want to go into a manual mode or automatic mode, it's really at your own discretion. Me, I've been cropping my images for so long, for so many years, I just go right into the manual mode. I would bother everyone and waste their time on how the horizon tool works, but the horizon tool works like any other ordinary horizon tool. There's really nothing special to it, but we do offer a horizon tool. But I mean, what it sums down to, like whether if you're using Photoshop, whether if you're using Lightroom, the main reason why you would use Viewpoint is by far, one, our anchor points are a really good attribute to the software. You can actually work the anchor points in conjunction with your loop tool. You actually get faster results in Viewpoint than you would to other competitors. Those 15,000 dedicated modules that we have to offer in Viewpoint 2, keep in mind, dedicated, not generic. Just give our competitors a run for their money. And the intensity slider, like I said, will give you 30% more fine-tuning control over any other application on the market. So on that note, I mean, I'm pretty much done on that note, because I believe each presenter only has about 15 minutes, and we're closing in at 10 minutes, so I'm about to tap out. But You're more than welcome to go to our website, download the trial, play around with the software. I think we're even running specials to like the 25th of this month for $49, and you can't go wrong. So I'm pretty much wrapped up here, David. I just truly hope that what was showcased, people had an opportunity to absorb and see like what we have to offer as far as like geometric and keystoning corrections.
Well, thanks, Hector. I thought that the presentation overall fit together pretty well in that we built up from the very simplest tools to some of the more sophisticated ones to, you know, the real A-League materials that help people quickly and accurately correct their images.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, for sure. Like as you said earlier, I mean, you can go out and spend, you know, a tremendous amount on some really expensive tilt and shift lens, or you can rely on these really advanced like image processing softwares that take you all the way. I mean, if I was to tell you what lens I use to capture each one of these images, you and CD would probably laugh at me. I mean, I used Canon's 18 to 55 kit millimeter lens with image stabilization to capture the mass majority of these things, besides the 15 millimeter fisheye that you saw in the beginning.
well, but the advanced software, like I said at the beginning of the presentation, the advanced software lets us use lenses that perhaps in the past weren't quite as capable. Sorry, we use lenses that aren't quite as capable as sort of the blast from the past and get new life out of them. And so I think that's how can that not be a good thing?
I mean, how can you not? Yeah, I mean, let's be realistic. Do you want to spend more time? Do you want to spend more time behind your computer, or do you want to spend more time behind your camera? I'll let you decide. I know you personally, so I know where you want to be at, but that's what it boils down to. You know, not only are we cutting like the post-production workflow time in half, but at the same time we're giving you the image quality that you need and that you want. Because for years, and I'm pretty sure the both of you can agree with me, for years we've been sacrificing image quality for turnaround time. And I mean, at the end of the day, I want it all. I want it all.
That's a good point to make the next transition. We're going to talk a little bit about webinars coming up, and then we're going to get into some of the discount programs and the giveaways, and Hector, stand by because I'm going to want you to talk during that part about your company's offering.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, no worries.
Okay, our webinars are all recorded. They can be found at spyder.datacolor.com. Some of the topics that have been recorded in the past include focus controls and remote triggering, end-to-end color management and soft proofing, convergence of still and motion or video capture, floral photography, architectural photography, Photoshop editing. There's literally dozens of recorded webinars at this point. New webinar coming up between now and the end of the year. Tomorrow we have a great webinar with Dan Hughes and myself. It's Taking Control of Landscape Photography. It's co-sponsored by Nick. Dan is going to spend quite a bit of time talking about the Nick collection and how that can help you edit and enhance your landscape photography. So if you're interested in that, I strongly encourage you to participate. I want to thank Datacolor and DxO for sponsoring this webinar, www.datacolor.com and of course DxO.com. Today's giveaway is the Spyder 4 Pro, and I'm looking for winners. The Spyder 4 Pro winner is Richard Stokes.
Nice.
Richard, I hope you're still online, and our marketing manager will be getting in touch with you via email to get your contact particulars and get this off to you. And then we also have a Viewpoint 2 software package, and the winner for that is, I hope I pronounced this right, Carissa Lansing.
Nice.
Forgive me if I mispronounced your name. There's also a discount, 20% off all Spyder products purchased at datacolor.com. The discount code is STILL20. It's going to be valid through the 11th of December, U.S. only. I also wanted to mention that I'm always available to answer questions for people. My email address is dsaffir@mac.com. If you have questions about product or technology, I'll do my best to answer you. I want to mention that I do travel and I'm away from my desk quite a bit. If I don't answer you within 24 hours, please don't be afraid to bug me. Send another email and I'll do my best to answer you.
So you hear that, everyone? Everyone's going to email David tonight.
Yeah, well, sometimes they do. Sometimes they do.
Everyone email David at 8
On the
p.m.
other hand, Hector is so cool that he has an invisible blog and an invisible website.
I don't know why that's not showing up, but Hector, what is your website address?
My website's HectorMartinezphotography.com, and I mean, if you're interested in seeing some of like my third world country photography or some of the glamour stuff that I dabble into, you're more than welcome to check it out. You can also find me off of DxO's website, where we're constantly doing like webinars and tutorials, but I'm pretty sure you're going to see a lot more of us and Datacolor doing a whole bunch of interesting things in the near future to come. So I would just strongly just stay tuned.
Okay, and David Tobie's blog, great technical information, cdtobie.wordpress.com. I forgot to mention my blog, which is listed there for you. Has a lot of tutorials and how-tos and that sort of thing. And there's David Tobie's website. I think that's it for today. We're finishing right on time. We have another webinar tomorrow on landscape photography. If you have any interest, please do join us. And hope to see you next time. Have a great
Excellent. Day. David, thank you so much for having me. I had a blast as always. And if I don't see you on the road soon, I'll see you at a local event sometime soon.
We'll do it again, Hector. Bye-bye.
Excellent. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good day, everyone. Bye.